All right, so let's continue with today's class. So in the second hour of today's class, what we're going to be doing is we're going to take a look at the measures of central tendency that we just talked about, and we're going to see how to actually calculate those. So we're going to go through a quick mean, median, mode recap, and then we'll have some in-class chapter 2 practice where we will learn how to calculate these new measures of central tendency using Excel. We'll also have time for some extra practice, and I'll mention the homework assignment that will be coming up due before next class. All right, so once again, the idea behind these three measures of central tendency, these three scores, is the idea that we need to summarize our data. We need to present our data in a way that other people can understand it, where it will give them the correct picture of what all of our data is sort of trying to tell us. So for example, if the governor of Indiana wants to know how much money does the average student have in order to go to university, how much funding do they have access to, he doesn't want to hear tens of thousands of scores, tens of thousands of dollar amounts. He wants to hear one number that will give him a good idea of how much the typical student has access to. And we saw that that was that representative single score, that measure of central tendency. And we also saw that there was three of those that are used in psychology. First one, by far the one that is most used, is the mean. That is the balance point of your scores. It takes into account how many scores are on each side as well as the weight of them on each side. And for a sample, the symbol was capital M, that's sample mean. For a population, the symbol was the Greek letter mu, that's population mean. The median was the measure of central tendency that just looked at how many scores are on one side and how many scores are on the other side. Does not care about the size of the scores. All it wants to know is that the number of scores on one side are the same as the number of scores on the other side. And for a sample and a population, the term for the median is just median. And then finally, we also looked at the mode. The mode is the most frequent score in your frequency distribution. And for a sample and a population, once again, the term for that was simply mode. All right, so we also saw that the mean, the median, and the mode react differently when new data is introduced. Specifically, they react differently to outliers. So if we had Elon Musk, who is stepping in and giving a select few Indiana University students access to $60,000 a year in terms of college scholarships. Once those students enter the Indiana University population, they will drastically affect certain measures of central tendency, and they will not drastically affect other measures of central tendency. So this is the mean highly funded students. Once you put in those students, this is your new mean. So the mean is very sensitive to outliers, very extreme scores. The median, on the other hand, pre-funding median, put in the new scores, does not move very much. So the median is more robust to outliers. And in this distribution, the median would be a better choice, a more accurate representation of all of the scores. And then finally, we have the mode, which is the score of the highest frequency. And as we saw, this did not move at all with the newly highly funded students. The mode is very robust against outliers. So those are the three measures of central tendency. And you might be wondering, before we get into actually how to calculate those, why the mean is used the most, even though it is the most sensitive to these outliers. And the reason for that has to do with how much information is used in order to calculate each of these measures of central tendency. So the mean uses the most information. It typically, in most cases, will give you the best representative score because it takes the number of scores on each side as well as their distance from the center on each side to calculate that measure of central tendency. So that's like two pieces of information, the number of scores and their distance. The median, on the other hand, only takes in one piece of information. That's the number of scores. So it just looks to the left, looks to the right. It takes in less information, so typically it's not as useful a measure of central tendency and then the mode takes in the least amount of information. It's not even looking left or right, it's just looking at what's the frequency of any particular score. So that's part of the reason why the mean is most widely used. But as we saw, it's very sensitive to outliers, so you cannot use it indiscriminately. You have to take a look at your frequency distribution, and if you have outliers, you have to think about using another measure of central tendency. All right, so enough conceptual stuff. I think we got a good grasp on what the mean, the median, and the mode actually is. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take some time to actually calculate those. So if you haven't already, in your Canvas files, in your Excel practice sheets, you will find 02B practice, not extra practice, but the practice one, and that's for today. So open that up, and what we're going to do is we are going to go through those live and show you how to calculate each of these three measures of central tendency. So we're looking for this sheet here, particularly with these scores. And let me just zoom so we can see that full. And there we go. All right. Yes, we do. Okay. So, does anybody not have this Excel sheet open and ready to go? We're all good? All right, so what we have here, we'll do example number one. We have, once again, 3 sets of scores. So once again, you can think of having 12 participants, and we measured their abilities on math, we measured their abilities on English, and we measured their abilities on music. And we have these 3 sets of scores for these individuals. We want to calculate the sample mean, we want to calculate the median, and we want to calculate the mode for each of these 3 scores. So let's start off with the X scores, and we'll calculate the mean for this one first. So the mean in Excel, what we do, let it know we're giving it a function, we put in that equals, and then the formula for the mean is average. So we type in average, and once again, Excel very nicely highlights what it thinks we're trying to put in there, and it says, hey, this returns the average, the arithmetic mean of its arguments, and that's exactly what we want to do. So as you're learning these formulas, make sure you always kind of check that description there and make sure you got the right one. So we type in average, open parentheses, we highlight our X scores, close those parentheses, hit enter, and we have the mean for the X scores. We're going to pop that into our answer cell, and notice that if we do this manually, which is never a good idea, you will get this wrong. So even if you put in 43.17 manually, you are likely to get this incorrect because this is not 43.17. This is 43.17, actually 16666666666 all the way down. So you definitely don't want to start rounding off early. So what Excel does, if you use that equals function, it carries the entire value and it keeps your calculations as accurately as possible. And this is something you want to get into a habit of doing because you do not want to accumulate rounding error when you're dealing with somebody's life like you are in psychology. All right, so let's calculate the mean for the Y scores. So once again, equals average, open parentheses, highlight those Y scores, close your parentheses, hit enter. We got the mean for the Y scores. Pop it up into your yellow answer cell using the equals function. And we see we got that one correct. And then finally, for the Z scores, equals average, open parentheses, highlight those Z scores, close your parentheses, hit enter, and we have a mean for our Z scores. Pop it in the yellow answer. Pop it in the yellow answer cells. I'll get it back. There we go. Pop it into the yellow answer cells using the equals function, and we see that we have that one correct. All right, so does everybody have all three means calculated? All good? All right, next one, median. Median is very friendly. The formula for median is median. So you put in equals, type in median, open parentheses, highlight your X scores, close those parentheses, and we have our median for our X scores. Pop that into your yellow answer cells using the equals function, and we got that one correct. Once again, for the Y scores, equals median. And once again, notice Excel being very friendly, returns the median or the number in the middle of a set of given numbers. That's exactly what we want. Gives us confidence that we're doing this correctly. Highlight your Y scores, close those parentheses, pop that into your answer cell using the equals function, and we got that one correct. And then finally, for the Z scores, equals median, open parentheses, highlight those scores, close your parentheses, hit enter, pop that into our Z score, pop that into the answer cell using your equals function, and we see that we got that one correct. Now here we got a very interesting kind of situation going on here. So you'll notice that for the for the X scores, the mean and the median are very, very close together. We got a mean of 43, we got a median of 44. That indicates that your distribution is pretty much symmetrical, right? So it's kind of, it's got scores on both sides. On the other hand, look at the Y scores here. We have a mean of 50. We got a median of 25. That's an indicator that you got outliers in your data set. And you can see that in the Y scores, we have these two individuals here that really scored really high, much higher than everybody else. So that's a nice way to kind of test which one you should be using. You can very quickly check your mean, check your median. If the two of them are very different, you got to slow down and start thinking about which one of those are you going to use. And then finally here for the Z scores, you can notice again, we have a mean and a median that are very different. And once again, if we check in on those Z scores, we can see that there are actually four individuals that have extremely high scores for the Z scores. All right, last one here for the mode. Mode is also very friendly. The formula for mode is mode. Now, you'll see that it has that mode.multi, mode.single. We don't have to worry about that for this course. That is when you have basically a distribution, multiple modes are for distributions where there's two peaks. We're only going to deal with the simple case, which in this case we can just use the formula mode. So mode, we put in mode, open parentheses, highlight those cells, close up the parentheses for the X scores, hit enter, and we see that we have a mode of 15. 15 is the most frequent score amongst the X scores. We'll do it again for Y equals mode, open parentheses, highlight those Y scores, close your parentheses, hit enter. We see that we got a mode of 22. Pop that into the answer cells using the equals function. And then finally, for the Z scores, equals mode, open parentheses, highlight those Z scores, close your parentheses, and we see that we have a mode of 104. Pop that into our answer cell, and you see that we got those ones correct. Now you'll notice that the mode is really kind of all over the place in these situations. So for the X scores, the mode is nowhere near the mean or the median. For the Y score, the mode is close to the median, but nowhere near the mean. And for the Z score, the mode is higher than either of those two. So this is something that often happens when you have the mode, especially if you don't have a lot of data points. So we only have 12 individuals in our data set. So it only takes, in this case, 2 to 3 individuals in order for a particular score to be the most popular score. So that's just something to think about whenever you're using the mode. Not such a good idea when you have low numbers of data. All right, does anybody have any questions about this one? Everybody got perfect on all 9 calculations? All right, so now that we've calculated those, let's see what happens when we introduce some outliers. So let's say that we continued our study on these students here, and we calculated their math, their English, and their music scores. Now let's say that we added one more student, and this student just blew the roof off of our scores. So this student just maxed out all the scores, scored 1,000 on each of these scores. Let's take a look at what that does for the mean, the median, and the mode. So the first thing we're going to do here is I'm going to show you what's going to happen to you probably, well, it happens to me about once a week when I'm using Excel. And what's going to happen is at some point you're going to calculate the mean, and you're going to put in equals mean, open parentheses, you're going to highlight your scores, you're going to close the parentheses, and you're going to get that weird message from Excel right there. So that message, hashtag name, is Excel's way of telling you, I don't recognize your formula. So that means that we try to ask Excel to use a formula that it does not recognize. And again, this happens to me about once a week because I think of the mean as the mean. I don't think of it as the average. So what we got to do is if we get those error messages, we take that as information. We say, all right, we made a mistake here. What did we do? We check our cell and we look up here to see what's in there. And we go, oh, I know what we did. We put in mean instead of average. And you just go ahead, you fix it. And you calculate the average for those scores, including the outlier. All right, so let's do that for the Y scores as well. So equals average, open your parentheses, highlight your scores. And then finally for the Z scores, equals average, open your parentheses, highlight your scores. And let's pop those up into our answer cells up here as well. And we see that we got those correct. And also notice that this one student, this one outlier, this one individual that scored extremely highly has now massively affected our calculations of the mean. So the mean after the outliers student was included for the X scores is like 116. Before it was less than half of that. It was 43. The mean for the Y scores has jumped from 50 all the way up to 123. The mean for the Z scores has more than doubled all the way up to 139. So one student has more than doubled every single score. Now that's a problem because you want to report a score that is representative of all of these students, and none of these students is really represented by these really, really high scores. So in this case, let's see what happens when we calculate out the median. So we got equals median, open parentheses, highlight those scores for the X scores, and we'll continue on, equals median, open parentheses, highlight your Y scores, and let's finish it up, equals median, whoops, open parentheses, highlight your Z scores, and we can pop those into our answer cells, and we get those correct. And now notice that for the median, your scores have barely moved. So pre-outlier, your median for your X scores was 44. Post-outlier, it's 53. Pre-outlier, your median for the Y scores was 25.5. Post-outlier, it's only 27. It's barely gone up, just over one score, 1 point. Pre-outlier, your Z score was 41. Post-outlier is 44. So in this case, because of that one student that's a vast outlier, the use of a median would be more appropriate for this data here. All right, and let's finish it off by calculating our mode. So equals mode, open parentheses, highlight your X scores, and we'll do that for the Y scores, equals mode, open parentheses, highlight your Y scores, and then finally equals mode, open parentheses, highlight your Z scores, and we'll pop those into our answer cells, and we get those ones correct. And notice that in this case, your mode has not changed at all. So this one student with this incredibly high score, because there's just one of them, they did not have the frequency required to shift the mode at all. So in this case, the mode is completely unaffected by this increase, by this one student with this massive, massive score. All right, any questions on that? Everybody with me so far? All right. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at some strategies that you can use in Excel to basically not have to do the same thing over and over and over and over and over again like we've been doing. So we've practiced, I think, enough in sort of getting used to entering in these functions. Now it's time to do a little bit more in terms of getting efficient at Excel. And what we're going to learn today right now is how to copy and paste a function. So if you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, you can become very quick at doing that. So for example, we want to calculate the mean, the median, and the mode. And we want to do it for the X scores, we want to do it for the Y scores, we want to do it for the Z scores. We're doing the same thing 3 times. We're calculating the mean 3 times, we're calculating the median 3 times, we're calculating the mode 3 times. And Excel would not be very effective if we had to manually do that every single time. So what you can do instead is you do it once. So let's calculate the mean for the X score. So equals average, open parentheses, highlight your X scores. And then what you can do is you can copy and paste your function. And there's a number of different ways to copy and paste. I like to use the keyboard shortcuts. You can copy it by going Control-C. And then if you move it to where you were put your new function, you can hit Control-V and it will calculate that mean for you. So once again, we hit Control-C to copy our function. We move it to where we want to put our new function. We hit Control-V and Excel has calculated out the mean of our Z scores and the mean of our Y scores without us having to manually input it for a second and third time. So we can check these and make sure that they're correct. We pop it into our answer cells, and you can use copy and paste in your answer cells as well, because we want to do the same thing 3 times. So we can copy that equals function and paste it for our Y and our Z answer cells, and it will copy and paste that equals function as well, and you can see that we got those correct. So the key thing to know when you're doing Excel functions and when you're copying and pasting Excel functions, that what Excel does is it takes where your answer is, where your function is, and it moves that, and tied to it is your entire array of scores that you've highlighted. So whatever's in parentheses gets tied to this function here. And what that means is that if you move your function over 1, if you copy and paste it and move it over 1, the data that you're accessing will also get moved over 1. And if you copy and paste it and move it over 1, 2, 3 steps, and then you move it up 2 steps, your array will also get moved over 3 steps and up 2 steps. So that's just something to keep in mind, and we'll see how to sort of navigate that in just a moment. But let's finish off this second example here. So once again, we want to do the median. We want to do it 3 times for the X, the Y, and the Z scores. So we can go equals median, open parentheses, highlight your scores, and we get a median of 12. And once again, we want to do the same thing with the Y scores. So we can hit Control-C, that is to copy, Control-V, that's to paste, calculated the median for the Y scores, move it over to where the Z scores is, hit Control-V again, calculated the score, the median for the Z scores, and then we can put this into our equals function. And once again, we can copy and paste those, and we see that we've calculated our medians correctly. And then finally, we have our modes. So equals mode, open parentheses. We calculate the mode of the X scores. We want to do that again for the Y scores. Control-C to copy, Control-V to paste, Control-V to paste again. And we can put in our equals function for our answer cells. And once again, you can copy and paste that and get all of those correct as well. And this is something that you can get very proficient in, and it'll increase the kind of speed at which you can do your calculations. So for example, we could have calculated the mean the mode, and the median just for the x scores. And then using copy and paste, we could have copied all three of those functions wholesale, one at a time. And then we could have entered them into our equals function by putting in that first equals function, whoops, and then copying it, and then copying those three. And you can see that once you kind of get very proficient at this copy and paste move, you can get a lot done in Excel in a very, very quick time. So this is something that I highly recommend you get proficient at, because what this will do is it'll not only make you more effective at Excel, you know, for the long run for your career, but it will also give you a lot of time on the exams to think about what you should be doing rather than actually having to type out furiously multiple functions. All right, so has everybody got that done on example number 2? You still a little bit? Yep. Yep. Oh yeah, no, we're not quite there yet. So we were doing this one over here first. We're going to do that one just a moment. So is everybody good on example number 2? All right. So we're going to take a look at example number 3 right now. And example number 3, I've designed it to show you one of the pitfalls, one of the things you have to keep in mind when you're doing copy and pasting. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what not to do first, and then I'll show you how to fix it. All right, so we got example number 3 here, and we have our x scores, we got our y scores, and we got our z scores, and we want to calculate out the mean, the median, and the mode. And you might say to yourself, all right, I'm doing the same thing 3 times, so I'm going to go equals average and calculate out those x scores, and then I'm going to go equals median, and I'm going to calculate out those x scores, and equals mode, and calculate that for those x scores. And let's pop those into our answer cells up here. And we got the mean correct, we got the median correct, we got the mode correct. All right, so we got everything correct. We want to do the same thing 3 times, so let's just copy and paste those. And we'll copy and paste our answer equations, and something went horribly, horribly wrong. So you can see that in our green grading cells over here, while we got the scores for the x, while we got the measures of central tendency for the x scores correctly, we totally got the y scores incorrect for the mean and the median. And we got the z-score mean wrong, and we don't even have a mode for the z-score. It can't even calculate one out. So what went wrong here? Well, what went wrong is we forgot, in this case, this principle of copy and paste. And the principle of copy and paste is that Excel takes the function that you're copying and pasting, and it will also take all of the cells that are being accessed, and it'll move that around as one unit. It'll move that around as one piece. And in this case, doing that made us miss certain scores. So to see what happened, one thing that you can always do, and I highly recommend this when you're learning how to copy and paste, is whenever you copy and paste, just kind of double click the cell that you copied and pasted into, and it will show you what's in that cell. So it'll show you the function that's in the cell, but more importantly, it'll show you the numbers, the cells that your function is accessing. So in this case, we double check our x function for the average, and everything is great. It's accessing the scores, it's calculating out the average. That is completely what we want to do. But when we double click on those y scores, notice what happened. Excel has done exactly what it promised to do. It took our function in our array and it moved it over 1. Right? We copied and pasted over 1. It took the arrays over 1. But notice, because the y scores have 2 more scores, we didn't account for that, and Excel ignored those 2 scores. And that's why the average was incorrect for our y scores. And if we look at our z scores, it's even worse. We missed 4 scores on our z scores because, again, the x scores were only where there was less of those than we had for the z scores. So that's why our calculations went incorrect on the y-scores and the z-scores, even though we were using that copy and paste function. So you've seen what can go wrong. What can we do to fix this? Well, one thing that we can do is we want to make sure we can still use these functions. We can still use copy and paste, but we want to make sure that we set it up in a way where it's going to work for all three sets of scores. And one way to do that is to just start at the set of scores that is the largest, that has the most scores, and make a function that will fit those scores, and then copy and paste that one. So for example, here, we calculate the average for the z-scores, because they have the highest number of scores. And then when we copy and paste that, you can see that we have the mean for the y-scores correct. And if we double click, you'll notice that it's including all of the y-scores. Now we have these two blank cells over here. We don't have to worry about that because the function of average ignores any blank cells. It'll ignore any words. It won't take those into account. So we're getting the correct calculation because we planned ahead so that we could use this copy and paste function. If we paste it onto the x scores, once again, we get that correct as well. Double click on it just to check, and we see that we are now including all of the x scores, getting that correct mean calculation. And we can do that for the median as well. So open parentheses median. Let's start with these z-scores, the highest number of scores. We now have the median correctly calculated for the z-score. And if we copy and paste that, we'll have the median correctly calculated for the y-scores, median correctly calculated for the x-scores. And once again, I highly recommend, as you're learning to copy and paste, just double click on the functions that you copied and pasted and make sure that it's still containing the scores that you want it to contain. So in this case, we double clicked on the y median function to calculate the y-scores, and we see that it is including, we're not missing any of the y-scores, and that gives us confidence that we're doing it correctly. So one last one equals mode, open parentheses, highlight all those z-scores. Now we got the mode correct for the z-scores, and we can copy and paste that mode function using the Control-C, Control-V functions, and double click, check out those x scores, and you can see that we have the entirety of the x scores included. That's why the function in this case is correct. All right, so that was the example, just kind of show you what can go wrong and how to fix it when you're dealing with copying and pasting. So that's going to wrap up this kind of lecture portion of the second half here. So what you have is you got a few more examples, example number 4, number 5, and number 6. Highly recommend practice those copy and paste techniques. You can get very quick on this and become very, very efficient with Excel. So I would recommend giving that a whirl. There's also extra practice available, another Excel sheet that is basically the same format to practice the mean, the median, and the mode. And just a reminder that if you did your Chapter 2 pretest and you didn't get 100, you can do the MyStatLab study plan, use the Quiz Me option to earn those mastery points. Just a heads up that the mastery points, they are due at midnight before the first exam. So the mastery points are there to kind of let you practice this leading up to the exam. So that's when we're going to make it due, midnight, right before the exam. So you got time to let other concepts sink in before you have to try to get those mastery points. All right, and you are now ready to go for homework assignment number 3, Chapter 2, Part 1. So that's a homework assignment on measures of central tendency. And that will be due midnight before we meet again. Oh, wait a second. That's not Monday. That's for a Tuesday class. That is going to be due Sunday. Let me update that. Here we go. All right, so update that in your notes. That is due Sunday, May 19th. All of our assignments are going to be due, for the most part, pre-exam are going to be due midnight before the day that we meet for class. All right, so that is it for what I wanted to cover in this second hour. So what I'm going to do right now is let's dedicate half an hour right now to practice time / break time if you need it. So we are going to resume on our final sort of portion of today's class at 11. In the meantime, feel free to practice the new Excel sheets that you have on measures of central tendency. Feel free to practice with the order of operation sheets if you didn't complete those. You can start up on your homework. You can start up on your study plan. You can do a variety of different things. Call me over if you're having any difficulty, if things aren't working out, and we will do our final hour beginning at 11 a.m.